Hello. In this video, I'm going to teach you a little bit about high bypass turbofan jet engines. But first, I want to show you a couple of pictures at the pylon right near the exhaust, in line with the exhaust. You can see that there's modifications of the pylon at the just above the exhaust and behind it, where there are nozzles. This is perfect. This is a perfect place for chemicals to be ejected out of an aircraft right into the exhaust stream to make it look like it's a normal trail for a jet engine for commercial jets. So just look at the materials near the nozzles. It's a modified pylon. The material's not the original color, it's modified, and it's an add-on. I have checked drawings, and this is not an original kind of modification or equipment for a new aircraft. This is one of the places that is very likely that we are being sprayed from. So now, having said that, let's look at a large bypass, high bypass turbofan engine, jet engine, and that's what I'm going to be talking about here. Take a look at some of the pictures, and at some point here in the video, I'm going to stop showing pictures of the engine, and I'm going to show you the chemical trails. So you just listen and look at the trails in the picture, and you'll see that there's no way that a high bypass turbofan jet engine in a commercial aircraft or large military aircraft can produce any of these trails. High bypass turbofan engines do not create condensation trails. And here is a bit of an explanation why. So don't be fooled. Long or short, if you see a trail coming out of a jet, with very few exceptions, it's an intentional toxic chemical aerosol, also known as chemtrails. It is also sprayed over populations, and that is an inhumane act on a population, and it is a crime against humanity. Police chiefs, take notice and act to protect. So you think those lines in the sky are contrails? Think again. The trails being left in the sky by large aircraft cannot possibly be condensation trails or contrails. Once this is understood, then we are left with the ominous question, what do these trails consist of? High bypass turbofan jet engines do not create condensation trails. The ratio of the air to the exhaust is much too high to facilitate the formation of condensation, because the majority of the air expelled from the back of the engine is not combusted. It is passed through the fan and simply blown out the back without mixing with any fuel at all. It's almost as if it's a propeller plane and using the jet turbine as the engine making the propeller turn around. So let me say that again. The ratio of air to exhaust is much too high to facilitate the formation of condensation, because the majority of the air expelled from the back of the engine is not combusted. It is passed through by the fan and simply blown out the back without any form of mixing with fuel or any form of exhaust because of that. Turbine engines are the power plant for these high bypass turbofans. Turbine engines are used in other applications besides powering jets. They are also used to power helicopters, yet we never see trails coming from helicopters, and the reason is simple. turbine engines almost never produce condensation trails. In the turbofan jet engine, notice the large ratio between the bypass fan diameter and the core part of the engine? It's huge. Every condition at the exhaust output of the engine is wrong for contrail formation. The formation of condensation trails requires high vacuum, cold temperatures, and high humidity. However, the output side of a jet engine contains mostly outside air that has been pushed through the engine by the large ducted fan, the bypass fan. The ducted fan is the set of spinning blades that you see when you look at the front of the engine. So let me repeat. The output side of the jet engine contains mostly outside air that has been pushed through the engine by those blades. This high pressure at the output of the engine is contrary for the formation of condensation trails because of the pressurized air. And pressurized air has the ability to hold much more water in suspension without producing condensation. Only a fraction of the air that enters the engine is taken in by the turbine engine. The air is mixed with jet fuel, essentially kerosene. It's combusted, and then exits the engine under very high pressure and high temperature. Condensation formation requires a decrease in ambient air pressure to form, but the output of the turbine is under very high pressure, which prohibits the formation of condensation trails. Physics also tells us that condensation forms when air is cooled. But since the exhaust of the turbine engine within a jet is very hot, condensation formation is once again prohibited. Hot air can hold much more water without producing condensation. Furthermore, the ratio of air to fuel used in high bypass turbofan engines is as high as possible. Lots of air, but relatively little fuel, so as to keep engines efficient and cost effective. So the reduced amount of fuel in this ratio results in a lack of water in the exhaust. And this is yet another reason that high bypass jet turbofans cannot produce condensation trails. In short, the more efficient the engine, the less fuel it uses per unit of air moved, and this renders the high bypass turbofans virtually incapable of producing condensation trails unless they use water injection, which is extremely rare today. Simply said, every condition that is necessary for contrail formation is absent in the high bypass turbofan jet engine. Let me say that again. Every condition that is necessary for contrail formation is absent in a high bypass turbofan jet engine, and that is on all commercial aircraft. So commercial aircraft cannot be putting out a contrail. If you go to an airport and watch jets take off, you will see that they emit a faint trail of black soot, which is typical of burnt jet fuel, kerosene. But you will not see water vapor. The average diabatic lapse rate, which is the rate of decrease in temperature with altitude, is about 3 Fahrenheit degrees per 1,000 foot. Since the average temperature on the ground is 59 degrees Fahrenheit or 15 degrees Celsius, you can calculate that at 30,000 feet, the average temperature is 59 minus 3 times 30 equals minus 31 Fahrenheit or minus 35 Celsius. This cold, dry air provides inadequate conditions for condensation trail formation. Real condensation trails. Let's talk about real condensation trails. Real condensation trails, and you're not going to be thinking of what I'm going to be saying. Real condensation trails form not behind commonly used engines, but behind high vacuum areas of wings. This occurs when a jet is pitching up or when the jet is using heavy flaps. Both of these conditions greatly increase the vacuum or lift produced by the wing and therefore increase the probability of contrail formation. Now, contrails will normally appear on the outside edge of the wing or just outside the flaps when in a heavy flap condition. Both of these conditions require high relative humidity as well, which in most cases just isn't there. Contrails can also appear above the top surface of a wing while a jet is pitching up, such as just before touchdown, because the high vacuum created while changing pitch. Most of the wing contrails, explained just now, dissipate as soon as the vacuum zone ends. This explains why contrails typically last only 5 or 10 feet behind a wing, less than a second. As the vacuum zone ends, the air very rapidly reabsorbs the water vapor, causing the contrail to dissipate, except under the most humid conditions when the ambient air is unable to reabsorb the water. Let's talk about jet turbines or turbojets. In contrast to the typical turbofans that are used in commercial aircraft, turbojets work differently. Now we're talking about turbojets, not turbofan engines. Instead of just pushing the majority of the air out the back using a large fan, like a turbofan does, all or most, in the case of low bypass turbojets, most of the air is taken in by the engine and is forced through the combustion section of the engine. This difference in design has a few important implications. First, these turbojets, these engines, are less efficient at lower speeds, below Mach 2, but they produce thrust at much more higher velocity. This is why they are used on jet fighters and other high-speed combat aircraft. They are not used on large military aircraft and not used at all on commercial aircraft. It's just way too expensive to use a turbojet on a commercial aircraft. You don't need the speed and the power. Second, these engines have more water in their exhaust and therefore have the potential to produce short, non-persistent condensation trails when all of the required conditions are just right. And I mean just right. These conditions are so rare, and so that contrail formation is very rare, but it can occur. Remember, turbojet engines are used only on fighter jets, not large military aircraft and none on commercial aircraft. Again, that's turbojet engines, not turbofan jet engines. Remember, the turbofan has a large diameter at the front and it is basically just pushing air behind it. Contrail suppression patents are out there. The rare but possible contrail forming potential of turbojet engines, which are used on military craft, fighter craft, caused the development of contrail suppression technology. This technology reduces the contrail forming potential of these engines so that jets cannot easily be spotted while flying over enemy territory. Government-funded disinformation contractors often cite these patents as evidence that high bypass turbofans create contrails. But this is a blatant misapplication of the patents. The patents only apply to turbojets or low bypass turbojets used on fighter aircraft and not on the high bypass turbofans used on commercial aircraft and large military aircraft. So they're not contrails. Turbojets and low bypass turbofans, the only engines capable of producing rare condensation trails, are not used on commercial jets today. Nor are they used on large